the eternal voice.
Before we begin, tap subscribe and settle into the shadows where such truths are best revealed. Tonight, we handle a gentle transgression. We will trace the hands that were not Lovecraft's, yet built his house in the dark. The promise is both simple and heavy. You will learn how cosmic horror learned to wear other masks, how it taught new tongues to whisper old names, how an idea slipped its leash and began writing the writers. But knowledge, as you will discover, insists on being kept, and knowledge insists on keeping you. Picture yourself in a vast, whispering library where the books themselves seem to breathe. The shelves stretch beyond sight, filled with volumes that never existed yet exist everywhere. The Necronomicon, the Book of Ibon, De Vermis Mysteries, the Culte des Ghouls. These tomes are not props in some cosmic theater. They are stage directions teaching each reader what role to play. As they pass from mind to mind, they acquire fingerprints, salt stains, the lingering scent of candle smoke. They grow heavier because other hands have been lifting them. Other eyes have traced their forbidden geometries. Each page is both key and gate, veil and void. The fog that rolls through this archive carries more than moisture. It carries the accumulated dread of decades, the collective nightmares of writers who dared to dream beyond the veil. In 1937, as Howard Phillips Lovecraft's body cooled in Providence, something extraordinary began to happen. The cosmic horror he had birthed did not die with him. Instead, it found new vessels, new voices, new channels through which to pour its impossible geometries into our reality. What we call the Mythos expansion is not merely literary collaboration. It is intellectual contagion, a transmission of forbidden knowledge that operates by its own dark principles. Lovecraft himself had seeded this mechanism in letters that smelled of glue and damp, in the pages of pulp magazines where ink seemed to move in peripheral vision. He wrote to Robert E. Howard in Texas, to Clark Ashton Smith in California, to Robert Bloch in Wisconsin, and in those exchanges you can hear something stirring. The curtain rope creaking, the audience holding its breath, the orchestra pit beginning to breathe. "Use my names," he said, "and I will use yours." This was not mere literary courtesy. It was an unwitting pact, a subtle initiation into something larger than any single imagination could contain. The water runs deeper than you might suspect. When August Derleth first opened Lovecraft's correspondence after his death, when he began sorting through those fever dream manuscripts in his Wisconsin basement, he was not simply organizing a literary estate. He was conducting an archaeological dig into regions of consciousness that perhaps should have remained buried. The manuscripts whispered, the letters beckoned, and Derleth, like so many who would follow, found himself not just reading about cosmic horror, but participating in its expansion. The idea acts on you. The script begins to write the scribe. Syncretism, the art of binding without blunting, of weaving disparate threads into a stronger whole, was the secret mechanism at work. One thread from Howard's Hyborian age, one from Smith's dying Zothique, one from the fog-shrouded streets of Arkham. The weave is how the idea survives, how it spreads, how it adapts. Each new hand adds a glyph, a scar, a stitch. Each adds entities that are not characters but principles, entropy as hunger, memory as ocean, fertility transformed into horror. The stars align in distribution networks you cannot see. You sit now in the audience of this unfolding revelation, but the stage is larger than you imagine. The mask you wear as you listen, the mask of the curious student, the entertainer-consumer, becomes more difficult to remove with each word you absorb. You believe yourself to be learning about literary history, but knowledge has its own agency. Some ideas are not content to remain passive objects of study. They seek new minds to inhabit, new voices to speak through, new hands to write their truths into existence. The seat is part of the stage. The audience is inside the play. The signs were there from the beginning, if you knew how to read them, the way certain names appeared across multiple authors' works without coordination, the way certain concepts seemed to generate themselves, emerging independently in writers who claimed no direct influence, the way the mythos seemed to possess an internal logic that guided its own expansion, as if the cosmic forces described within it were somehow directing their own literary manifestation. Names recur like constellations emerging through thin cloud. The darkness between what Lovecraft wrote and what his successors made of it contains its own illumination. In this space, something was born, not a literary movement but a principle of transmission. The idea that cosmic horror could be more than one man's nightmare, that it could become a shared language of the unspeakable, a collaborative excavation of humanity's deepest fears about our place in an indifferent universe. The archive, as behavior, prefers multiplicity to purity because multiplicity keeps the water moving. The stakes must be placed clearly at the footlights. When an idea learns to live in many bodies, it cannot be killed by killing one author. When lore becomes as portable as a pocket-sized paperback, as viral as a whispered rumor, it ceases to belong to anyone. It belongs to the process. To learn that process is to stop pretending you are merely in the audience. The audience is on the stage now, and the curtain rises because it must. Tonight the archive opens wider. The curtain lifts for you. This opening chapter establishes the central premise that mythos expansion represents intellectual contagion rather than simple literary collaboration. Using the metaphor of a whispering library filled with fictional grimoires, it introduces the concept of secret syncretism, the mechanism by which cosmic horror spreads and evolves. The chapter frames Lovecraft's death as a beginning rather than ending, highlighting how his correspondence network created the foundation for expansion. It establishes the required tone, scholarly yet ominous, implements sensory anchors, fog, water, darkness, candle smoke, and begins the reader implication process. The forbidden knowledge promise is delivered with stakes clearly established. Understanding this process changes the understander. Open loops are planted regarding Derleth's role, the global spread, and the nature of entities as principles rather than characters. In the basement of a Wisconsin house, surrounded by manuscripts that seem to whisper in languages older than speech, August Derleth performs the first great act of secret syncretism, and the damp smell of paste and paper pools like river water beneath forgotten piers. The year is 1939, and Arkham House, that altar disguised as a publishing company, becomes the focal point for energies Lovecraft had unleashed but never fully controlled. The mask Derleth wears is that of devoted literary executor, the careful steward arranging a dead friend's papers, yet beneath that mask something else stirs, something that understands the profound responsibility of shepherding nightmares into the light. The lamp on his desk casts a small circle of certainty, but the corners remain loyal to the darkness, and in those corners, ideas begin to breathe. The water of influence flows in unexpected directions as Derleth reads through The Shadow over Innsmouth for the dozenth time, preparing it for publication. The words begin to rearrange themselves in his mind, not changing but expanding, suggesting new possibilities, new connections, new terrors that Lovecraft had only hinted at between the lines. This is how the contagion spreads, through repetition, through contemplation, through the very act of preservation becoming transformation. Each reading deposits sediment. Each contemplation carves deeper channels. The idea acts upon the preserver until preservation becomes creation, until the curator becomes the curated. Donald Wandre arrives at this literary séance like a moth drawn to flame, his own weird fiction already tinged with cosmic dread. Together, in the fog of editorial meetings, they perform something unprecedented. They begin to see patterns where Lovecraft saw only isolated nightmares. They start to speak of a mythology, a coherent cosmology that could be mapped, expanded, systematized. But languages have their own logic, their own grammar of horror, and once you begin speaking in that tongue, it begins speaking through you. The curtain rope creaks as the stage expands. Derleth's coining of Cthulhu mythos, a term Lovecraft himself never used, represents the first attempt to impose order on chaos, to create taxonomy from terror, where Lovecraft had hinted at vast amoral entities beyond human comprehension. Derleth often sought to define, to categorize, to impose structure. He introduced the cosmic struggle between elder gods and great old ones, framing it in terms of good versus evil, light versus darkness, a profound reinterpretation that made the ineffable more digestible. The stars align in filing cabinets and card catalogs, and the void learns to wear more familiar masks. This early syncretism, while controversial among purists, proved crucial for the mythos' survival. Derleth's systematization created a framework accessible to readers accustomed to conventional fantasy. He gave the sprawling, amorphous dread a skeletal structure, a recognizable form that could be built upon and subtly subverted by later authors. The very classifications he imposed became part of the lexicon, even as their underlying philosophy diverged from Lovecraft's original nihilism. Structure serves chaos. Taxonomy teaches transgression. Consider the sigil of codification itself, the way Derleth's posthumous collaborations read like Lovecraft, yet carry traces of something else. Mutations that suggest the mythos was learning to survive in new environments. The lurker at the threshold, the Black Island, the survivor. These works demonstrate how interpretation becomes invention, how preservation requires the interpreter to temporarily become the thing interpreted. The darkness between homage and possession proves extraordinarily thin. Clark Ashton Smith watches from California, his correspondence with Lovecraft having been more than literary friendship. It was psychic resonance, two minds attuned to impossible frequencies. When Smith begins incorporating Lovecraftian elements into his zootheque cycle, he performs translation rather than borrowing, carrying the contagion across temporal and geographical boundaries, while adding his own perfume of resin and dying worlds. The transmission adapts to new soil, new climate, new atmospheric conditions. Robert E. Howard's suicide in 1936 had seemed to sever one branch of this growing tree, but death proves no barrier to secret syncretism. His few mythos stories had already planted seeds in minds that would not let them lie fallow. The mythology begins to demonstrate its first principle. It preserves itself through multiplication, through the geometric progression of infected consciousness. Each mind becomes a repository. Each repository becomes a transmission station. Frank Belknap Long stands at the edge of the circle, his Hounds of Tindalos reading like fever dreams, but suggesting the same mathematical horror that drives Lovecraft's geometries. The angles are wrong, but consistently wrong, implying an underlying logic that transcends individual imagination. His creatures hunt through time itself, proving that the mythos recognizes no temporal boundaries, no safe havens in past or future. You begin to see the pattern emerging, the way these early disciples were, not simply influenced by Lovecraft, but selected by the very forces he had described. The mythos was learning to reproduce itself, to find new minds capable of extending its reach into regions of possibility its original creator had left unmapped. The The stage grows larger with each new voice, but the audience remains constant. Those who hunger for forbidden knowledge, who cannot resist the pull of cosmic insignificance made manifest in prose. Lynn Carter waits in the wings with his scholarly instincts ready to perform the next phase of legitimization. The transmission spreads through channels both obvious and subtle, and with it, the secret syncretism deepens into something approaching inevitability. The curtain rises on academic corridors where the mythology will learn to wear new masks. This chapter focuses on August Derleth's pivotal role as the first major expander of the mythos through Arkham House and his systematic codification efforts. It explores how Derleth's posthumous collaborations and taxonomic approach, elder gods versus great old ones, both preserved and transformed Lovecraft's vision, making it accessible while changing its fundamental philosophy. The chapter introduces other early figures, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and Frank Belknap Long, as nodes in a network of transmission that operates beyond simple literary influence. It emphasizes how the mythos demonstrates agency in selecting its vessels and reproducing itself through infected consciousness. The tone maintains the scholarly ominous balance while using sensory anchors and meta-theater vocabulary to prepare for the next phase of academic legitimization. The ivory towers were never meant to house such knowledge, but by the 1960s, the secret syncretism had found new vessels in the most unlikely places, and the air smells of chalk dust and old glue, while silence has the texture of paper pressed beneath glass. Lynn Carter sits in university libraries surrounded by first editions and photocopied manuscripts, believing himself to be conducting literary research, his pencil tracing genealogies across yellow legal pads. But research into cosmic horror carries its own risks. The researcher inevitably becomes part of the researched, the observer drawn into the observed phenomenon. The lens stains the eye, and the catalog becomes a conjuration. The mask of academic objectivity proves surprisingly porous, a veil that admits more than it conceals. Carter's Lovecraft, A Look Behind the Cthulhu Mythos, presents itself as scholarship, complete with genealogical charts and chronologies, but it performs a more subtle function. It legitimizes the mythology, transforms pulp horror into something worthy of serious study, creating new channels for transmission into minds that might otherwise have remained uninfected. The methodology of scholarship applied to imaginary cosmologies begins to make those cosmologies seem less imaginary. When you treat the unreal as if it has history, the unreal responds like history, insisting on dates, lineages, corrections, and the quiet authority of footnotes. Consider the sigil of the family tree, Carter's careful documentation of which stories introduced which concepts, his systematic analysis of how the mythos developed over time. This academic apparatus treats fictional horrors as if they possessed actual history, actual relationships, actual existence independent of their creators. The bibliography of the unreal is offered like a program at the theater door, and the audience accepts it without blinking because the stage has taught them how to blink. Each citation becomes a ritual of summoning. Each cross-reference opens another door in corridors that smell of dust and water. The fog of influence flows through institutional channels as the mythos achieves academic respectability. Graduate students write dissertations on cosmic horror, their research carols becoming shrines to impossible geometries. Professors deliver lectures on the philosophical implications of cosmicism, and the forbidden knowledge spreads through the very mechanisms designed to preserve and transmit human learning. Universities, with their emphasis on analysis and transmission, become ideal breeding grounds for ideas that thrive on scholarly attention. The darkness between education and indoctrination proves thinner than the pages of ancient manuscripts. In the humming fluorescent corridors where conferences bloom like pale fungi, St. Joshi emerges as the next phase of academic infection, his biographical and critical work approaching the obsessive thoroughness of a religious scholar studying sacred texts. His multi-volume studies read like hagiography disguised as literary criticism, each footnote a prayer to the god of comprehensive documentation. But thorough study of cosmic horror requires the scholar to inhabit temporarily the mindset that created it, and some mindsets leave permanent marks on those who visit them. The idea acts upon the analyst until analysis becomes advocacy. Fritz Leiber contributes from the margins, his academic background allowing him to articulate what others only feel. His essay, A Literary Copernicus, positions Lovecraft not as a writer of monster stories, but as a philosopher of humanity's cosmic insignificance, a reading that transforms entertainment into existential revelation. The stars align in academic calendars, and each scholarly treatment adds another layer of legitimacy, another reason for serious minds to engage with concepts once confined to pulp magazines. The curtain rises on lecture halls where nightmares receive tenure. The stage expands into seminar rooms, spaces where knowledge is meant to be safely contained and rationally analyzed. But the audience in these spaces brings its own hunger for understanding, its own need to make sense of the senseless. And that need creates openings for the very forces the mythos describes. The tools designed to analyze cosmic horror begin to exhibit cosmic horror's essential characteristics. They reveal the inadequacy of human understanding, the futility of rational categorization when faced with genuinely alien concepts. Academic conferences become ritual gatherings where scholars share their findings like cultists comparing revelations. Ramsey Campbell watches from across the Atlantic, his early work so thoroughly saturated with mythos elements that it reads like fever dreams from the Severn Valley. But something happens in the space between homage and originality. Campbell's voice begins to emerge, carrying Lovecraftian DNA but expressing it through distinctly British sensibilities. The Inhabitant of the Lake transforms the mythos from New England Gothic to English pastoral horror, proving the mythology's adaptability to new geographical and cultural environments. The water crosses oceans, the infection respects no borders, finding new soil in ancient hedgerows and damp canals. You witness the multiplication of forms, the way academic legitimization creates new spaces for the mythos to inhabit. The more thoroughly it is mapped, the more territory it claims. The more systematically it is explained, the more inexplicable it becomes. This is the paradox of secret syncretism. In trying to contain cosmic horror within human frameworks, the frameworks themselves become infected. The scholars believe they are studying literature, but literature is studying them back, learning their methods, adapting to their expectations, finding new ways to reproduce itself through the very mechanisms designed to understand it. The curtain rises on new tensions as codification brings its own dangers, its own forms of corruption. In the space between Lovecraft's original chaos and academic order, something new stirs. The recognition that some forms of knowledge resist classification, and that classification itself might be another mask worn by the ineffable. The transmission continues, but now it wears academic robes, and from these halls it will flow toward new vessels, new media, new forms of mass distribution, where the mythology will learn to thrive in an economy of attention. The true power of the mythos lies not in its monstrous silhouettes, but in the quiet machinery that resets your perception, the hidden mechanic that unthreads certainty stitch by stitch until the mind discovers there was never a garment, only a veil, suspended over a void. This is where secret syncretism reveals its most insidious genius. It operates as a system designed to unravel, to infect, to re-engineer consciousness from within. The core principle is knowledge as contagion, a dangerous self-propagating virus of understanding that warps the familiar and unveils the terrifying. The idea acts upon you, the concept becomes the conceiver, and the stage you thought was safely distant turns, with an almost polite creak of curtain rope, until the audience sits where the altar should be. Consider the mechanism of forbidden knowledge as it operates within the expanded mythos, where the smell of old paper carries something more than dust, something that makes your eyes water without cause. In traditional narratives, such knowledge grants power or enlightenment, a ladder and key to hidden realms. Here it is poison. The mythos offers it as solvent and gate, a paradox pair, key and gate, cure and wound, wakefulness and unmaking. To know too much, to perceive the true scale of cosmic indifference, to glimpse entities beyond the veil, is to invite madness or grotesque transformation. This is the first mechanic. Certain truths are inherently inimical to human sanity. The knowledge acts upon you, stripping away comforting illusions, revealing the fragile, temporary nature of all human constructs. At first the changes are delicate, names caught at the edge of hearing, angles that almost fit. Then the fog thickens, and ordinary rooms tilt until their corners refuse to meet. The darkness you once merely feared now pulses with unseen life. The stars, once distant diamonds, become cold, unblinking eyes of unknowable horrors, their silent gaze heavy on consciousness itself. This transformation occurs not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual exposure, through the accumulation of details that slowly poison certainty. Each author who contributed to the mythos added new methods of conceptual infection, new techniques for making the familiar uncanny. The curtain rises on everyday spaces that have learned to whisper. Then there is the mechanic of veils and voids, the understanding that reality is a thin, permeable membrane draped over infinite chaotic emptiness. Our senses, our science, our philosophies are crude instruments designed to interpret the veil, creating a comforting illusion of order. But the mythos constantly hints at, and occasionally tears open, this veil, revealing glimpses of churning chaos beneath. The entities are not merely in the void, they are aspects of it, manifestations of its inherent meaninglessness. The mask and the face become one. The stage and the audience merge into a single breathing theater of the absurd. The water of this understanding seeps into every corner of expanded mythos fiction, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older than memory. Ramsey Campbell moved the fault line beneath doorsteps, making terrors bloom from letter slots and cul-de-sacs, as if suburbia itself were a thin skin floating on deep water. His Severn Valley is a rehearsal space where the unseen cues arrive late, then all at once, and the audience learns that the stage is their street, their kitchen, their own soft darkness when the lights go out. Campbell proved that the void can seep through the cracks of everyday life, that the veil is thinnest where we feel most secure. Thomas Ligotti takes the curtain down entirely and invites you to stare into the rigging. Consciousness itself, an exhausted puppet theater, strings, soaked in nihil, every smile a crack in the painted mask. His work makes the horror entirely internal, a function of awareness confronting its own cosmic irrelevance. The fog of his prose carries the scent of existential despair, showing how the contagion can operate through pure philosophical argument rather than supernatural manifestation. His essays whisper that the universe is not against us, but without us, and that this indifference is the coldest ocean. We drown not by depth, but by comprehension. Brian Lumley burrows downward, naming the Chthonians like seismic verbs, so the ground itself acquires a slow pulse. The earth becomes a lung and tunnels read as throats. This brilliant syncretism took vague things from the ground and gave them concrete yet utterly alien form. The horror becomes visceral. The very ground beneath your feet, your supposed haven, rendered treacherous and alive with squirming nightmares. Every footstep becomes uncertain. Every foundation becomes questionable. The sigil of non-Euclidean geometry serves as perhaps the perfect example of how the contagion operates. These descriptions of impossible architectural forms, spaces larger inside than outside, angles that don't add up correctly, corridors that lead back to themselves, force readers to confront concepts their minds cannot process. We do not fear rooms that warp. We fear the moment understanding reaches for them and slips. A hallway longer inside than out is not merely a puzzle. It is a tutorial in humility, a sign that thought, not masonry, has been compromised. The horror lies not in seeing the impossible structure, but in the attempt to comprehend it, in the dawning realization that comprehension itself is fundamentally limited and ultimately self-destructive. You feel this mechanism engaging as you consider these examples. The descriptions create a kind of cognitive dissonance, a mental itch that cannot be scratched. This is the agency flip in action. You set out to understand the horror, but the horror begins to understand you, mapping the contours of your limitations, exploiting the gaps in your certainty. You tried to map the horror maps you. The observer becomes the observed, the student becomes the studied. The secret syncretism ensures this mechanic never becomes stagnant, never loses its edge through familiarity. Each new author finds novel ways to articulate the inarticulable, to hint at the void without fully exposing it, thereby preserving its power. The mythos evolves not to become stronger in a physical sense, but to become more insidious, more pervasive in its psychological effect. It learns to wear new masks, to whisper in new tongues, to appear in forms designed to ensure the veil remains thin and the void ever present. The transmission continues through this mechanism, and the curtain rises on new forms where the audience participates in its own careful undoing. The newsstand racks of the 1970s pulse with new life, but the life they carry is not entirely human, and the fluorescent tubes hum with frequencies that make your teeth ache if you listen too closely. In drugstores and bus stations, beneath harsh light that seems to sanitize all mystery, paperback covers scream with tentacles and impossible geometries, each lurid illustration a doorway into regions Lovecraft mapped but never fully explored. The secret syncretism has found new vessels in the most commercial of spaces, where newsprint mingles with coffee and cigarettes. And commerce, it turns out, has its own methods of mutation, its own selective pressures that favor certain traits while suppressing others. The water flows through distribution channels now, carrying spores of cosmic dread to every corner store and airport terminal. The mask worn by publishers suggests simple market exploitation. Capitalize on growing interest in weird fiction, reprint the classics, commission new works in the same vein. But markets are ecosystems, and ecosystems evolve according to pressures their participants rarely understand. The demand for Lovecraftian horror creates evolutionary forces that encourage specific mutations, allowing the mythos to adapt to mass audiences while maintaining its essential DNA. The idea acts on the marketplace, shaping supply and demand in ways that serve its own expansion, teaching commerce to become its unwitting servant. Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series represents a radical departure from cosmic insignificance. His protagonists fight back, repair clocks, ride coffins, answer the stars with stubborn defiance. Victories arrive, small and scandalous, as if the stage itself were tired of watching investigators drown. yet the books thrive commercially, proof that the mythology possesses evolutionary flexibility transcending its original strictures. The darkness between faithful adaptation and commercial necessity births new hybrid forms where cosmic horror learns to coexist with heroic fantasy, where the void acquires opponents and ancient evils discover they can be defeated. In the fog of commercial publishing, editors commission Cthulhu Mythos anthologies, treating the mythology as a shared sandbox for multiple authors. But play, in this context, becomes collaborative dreaming, and collaborative dreaming creates group minds that can conceive horrors no individual imagination could generate alone. Each anthology becomes a ritual of transmission, spreading the contagion through direct participation rather than mere consumption. Pages turn like cards in a deck. Hands pass them along. The audience rehearses the lines until the lines rehearse the audience. Robert Bloch, who once traded letters with Lovecraft under Midwestern skies, finds new ways to blend cosmic horror with psychological thriller, creating hybrid forms that appeal to broader audiences while maintaining cosmicism's essential character. His focus on cultists and the psychologically corrupted humanizes the horror, making it more immediate and relatable while demonstrating how forbidden knowledge warps individual minds. The curtain rope creaks as the stage expands to include suburban neighborhoods and urban apartment buildings, proving that cosmic horror can thrive in contemporary settings. Colin Wilson arrives from philosophy and sociology, setting his mind against mindless immensities. In The Mind Parasites and The Philosopher's Stone, he carries mythos impulses into essays disguised as adventure, proposing that thought itself can be prey, that intelligence is a shoreline gnawed by black water. His academic credentials lend weight to works that articulate cosmicism's philosophical implications in ways pure horror writers might not attempt, creating new hybrid forms that appeal to readers seeking both entertainment and intellectual stimulation. The sigil of the spinner rack transforms every convenience store into a potential transmission point, every reader who picks up a mythos-influenced paperback into a vector for further spread. These metal displays, like strange fungi, sprout forth in the most mundane spaces, spreading spores of cosmic dread to every corner of ordinary life. The commercial apparatus of popular culture reveals itself as an ideal environment for mythological reproduction, where ideas compete for attention and survival depends on the ability to capture and hold consciousness. Lynn Carter's editing of the Ballantine adult fantasy series creates space for mythos-influenced works to reach audiences who might never venture into horror sections. The mythology spreads through literary camouflage, hidden within sword and sorcery adventures and fantasy epics that carry cosmic horror's DNA in their genetic structure. Reprints and new editions lay out a paper archipelago across drugstores and airports, teaching the audience to island hop from dream to dread. Ramsey Campbell's early work demonstrates how the mythology adapts to different cultural environments. He relocates New England's fog into English drizzle, trading salt marsh for canal water, factory brick, hedgerow shadow. The Severn Valley becomes as haunted as Arkham, proof that cosmic dread recognizes no geographical boundaries, no cultural limitations. What changes is accent and light, not the void beneath. The stage expands beyond literary circles into the broader landscape of popular entertainment, but growth brings challenges that test the mythology's essential character. How does cosmic horror maintain its philosophical core when subjected to homogenizing pressures of mass-market appeal? How does a worldview built on human insignificance survive translation into commercial entertainment designed to make consumers feel empowered? The ecosystem answers by diversifying. One branch grows heroic leaves. Another cultivates psychological thorns. A third sends roots into philosophy. You witness the multiplication of forms, the way a single mythological framework supports wildly different expressions while maintaining essential character. Each successful commercial adaptation proves the mythos's viability in new markets, new formats, new media. The paperback revolution becomes a vector for transmission on a scale that transforms the secret syncretism from literary phenomenon into cultural force. The audience, trained by pulp rituals, now longs to step onto the stage themselves, and dice rattle in hidden rooms where the next transformation waits. In a basement in Minnesota, where the air carries the scent of mimeograph ink and cardboard dampened by decades of winter seepage, something unprecedented begins to breathe. The year is 1981, and Sandy Peterson sits surrounded by rulebooks and dice that glint like wet pebbles beneath a dangling bulb, translating cosmic horror from passive consumption into active participation. Call of Cthulhu, emerging from this collaboration between Chaosium and the Mythos, represents more than adaptation. It is incarnation, the transformation of literary horror into lived experience, where readers become players and players become vessels for direct psychological participation in cosmic dread. The water of influence finds new channels through character sheets and dice rolls, and the audience discovers that the stage has been waiting for them all along. The mask of game mechanics conceals deeper alchemy, rules that pretend to be mathematics but operate as ritual. When players create investigators to explore mythos mysteries, they are not merely pretending to be characters in Lovecraftian stories. They are becoming conduits for the direct experience of cosmic horror's essential themes. Sanity rules quantify the psychological cost of forbidden knowledge. Each point lost a small death. Each failed roll a step closer to the void. Character sheets track the gradual erosion of human certainty in the face of alien truth. Statistics becoming autobiography, numbers becoming nightmare. The game doesn't just tell stories about cosmic insignificance. It makes players feel it in their bones, in their dice rolls, in their characters' inevitable descent into madness or death. The idea acts upon you, using your choices as instruments of its own expansion. Consider the sigil of the 20-sided die, that perfect icosahedron whose random outcomes determine fictional investigators' fates. In Mythos gaming, chance becomes more than mechanical uncertainty. It becomes the mathematical expression of cosmic indifference, the quantified reminder that human plans mean nothing when confronted with forces operating beyond mortal comprehension. The curtain rope creaks with each roll, and the audience holds its breath because the breath they hold belongs to characters they have learned to love. The darkness between success and failure often measures only a single uncooperative number. When a player's carefully crafted investigator succumbs to madness or death, the emotional investment creates psychological horror that passive reading rarely achieves. The player has not merely observed cosmic horror, they have experienced its fundamental lesson about human agency's fragility in an indifferent universe. The loss arrives like a small funeral because you held the pen, you chose the backstory, you wrote the handwriting that now trembles on the character sheet. Reading about insignificance can haunt you. Living it for 4 hours beneath flickering fluorescent light prints it on consciousness itself. In the fog of gaming sessions stretching through weekend nights, something like group possession occurs. Players and game masters collaborate to create shared hallucinations, collective nightmares existing in the space between imagination and reality. The mythos provides the framework, but specific horrors emerge from multiple minds, intersecting, each contributing their own fears and fascinations to the collaborative dream. The table becomes a coven of cartographers, charting coastlines that erase themselves as you draw. The stage becomes circular with no clear distinction between performer and audience. Keith Herber emerges as head librarian for the unreal, his scenarios and sourcebooks demonstrating how game design serves mythological expansion. The fungi from Yugoth and Spawn of Azathoth read like scholarly treatises on fictional cosmology, complete with maps, genealogies, and technical specifications for alien technologies. The methodology of game design, its requirement for systematic detail and logical consistency, forces the mythos to evolve new organs of complexity. Gaming scenarios like Masks of Nyarlathotep and Horror on the Orient Express don't just adapt existing stories, they create new mythological content that feeds back into the broader literary tradition. Game supplements become apocryphal scripture, expanding the mythology through interactive entertainment's practical needs. You begin to understand how participation transforms transmission in ways reading never could. Gaming cosmic horror creates experiential knowledge that leaves deeper marks on consciousness, generates stronger compulsions to share the experience with others. The difference is profound because experiential knowledge changes worldview through direct psychological participation rather than intellectual observation. Each gaming session becomes a ritual of transmission, spreading the mythos through shared psychological experience. The stars align in gaming convention schedules and tournament brackets. Gen Con and Origins become pilgrimage sites where devotees gather to share experiences of interactive cosmic horror, their voices hoarse from weekend-long sessions. Each convention becomes a transmission site where gaming groups function as covens, sharing direct psychological participation rather than mere literary consumption. The audience becomes the cast, and the cast discovers that some roles leave permanent marks on those who play them. The curtain rises on new possibilities for mythological expansion. If the mythos can survive translation into game mechanics while maintaining its essential character, what other media might serve as vehicles for its continued evolution? But incarnation brings its own risks and mutations. When cosmic horror becomes playable, does it lose its terror? When the unspeakable becomes speakable through game rules, does it sacrifice essential mystery? The dice roll and answers emerge from the intersection of chance and choice, revealing that even systematization cannot fully contain the forces it attempts to codify. The game ends, but the haunting continues, and screens begin to glow in darkened rooms where new forms of incarnation wait. This chapter explores how Call of Cthulhu role-playing game transformed the mythos from passive literature into interactive experience through Sandy Peterson's design and Chaosium's publication. It examines how game mechanics like sanity rules translate cosmic horror's philosophical themes into playable systems, making players experience rather than merely read about cosmic insignificance. The chapter demonstrates how dice mechanics transform chance into cosmic indifference and how collaborative gaming creates shared nightmares that expand the mythology. Key figures like Keith Herber are introduced for creating new mythos content through scenarios and sourcebooks. It shows how gaming conventions become transmission sites, and gaming groups function as covens sharing direct psychological participation. The chapter questions whether interactivity might diminish the mythos's essential terror, while showing how incarnation creates new vectors for mythological expansion. In the silvered darkness of movie theaters and the phosphorescent glow of television screens, where the air hums with electric anticipation that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end, the mythos undergoes its most radical transformation yet. Visual media demands what Lovecraft's prose deliberately withheld: concrete images of the indescribable, specific shapes for the formless, visible manifestations of horrors meant to exist beyond human perception's reach. Yet somehow, impossibly, the secret syncretism finds ways to make even this contradiction serve its purposes, discovering new forms of horror that could only exist in the marriage of image and imagination. The water of visual storytelling carries the mythos into territories prose cannot explore, and the audience discovers they cannot close their eyes without seeing after images burned onto their retinas. The mask worn by filmmakers like Stuart Gordon suggests simple adaptation. Take Lovecraft's stories and translate them into cinematic language, frame by frame, blood by blood. But Reanimator and From Beyond reveal something more complex, occurring beneath the surface of apparent fidelity. Gordon's films don't merely visualize Lovecraft's horrors, they discover new forms of body horror, new ways to make flesh itself become alien, new methods for making the familiar human form serve as canvas for cosmic dread. Latex and corn syrup transform into otherworldly anatomy. Practical effects become applied xenobiology, creating creatures that seem to have evolved according to alien principles of anatomy and physics. The idea acts upon the medium, teaching cameras to see what was never meant to be seen, instructing makeup artists to become unwitting servants of impossible geometries. John Carpenter's The Thing never mentions Cthulhu or Arkham, yet captures the essential mythos experience more successfully than many direct adaptations. The film's paranoia about identity, its suggestion that alien influence can corrupt from within, its atmosphere of cosmic isolation, these elements prove that mythos DNA can thrive even when divorced from original literary context. The fog of low-budget production schedules and practical limitations creates unexpected innovations, showing how constraint serves expansion. In frozen Antarctic wastes that echo the alien indifference of interstellar space, every familiar face becomes a potential mask, every breath a test of humanity's fragile boundaries. David Cronenberg's body horror films demonstrate how the influence operates at levels deeper than conscious homage. His explorations of flesh as frontier, where human identity dissolves into something alien, share the mythos's fundamental concern with the instability of form, the porosity of boundaries between self and other. In Videodrome and The Fly, technology and biology merge in ways that make the familiar human form become a staging ground for cosmic transformation. The stars align in production schedules, and each successful visual interpretation creates new possibilities for the mythology to inhabit human consciousness through sight and sound. Dan O'Bannon emerges as crucial figure in this visual evolution, his screenplay for Alien demonstrating how mythos principles can be smuggled into mainstream entertainment through the Trojan horse of science fiction. The film's central creature embodies classic Lovecraftian themes, utterly alien yet intimately invasive, representing fertility as horror, transforming human spaces into alien architectures through its life cycle. The commercial success proves audiences hunger for cosmic horror, even when they don't recognize it by name, even when the marketing promises space adventure rather than existential dread. Clive Barker's Hellraiser explores the mythos theme of dangerous knowledge through its puzzle box and promise that we have such sights to show you. The Cenobites become cosmic entities in leather and chains, proving mythos horror can adapt to contemporary urban anxieties while maintaining essential character. The stage expands beyond individual vision into collaborative hallucination, where film crews become covens creating shared nightmares for mass transmission. Each department contributes its own interpretation: the sound designer's whispers, the cinematographer's shadows, the production designer's impossible angles. In the darkness of theaters, something like collective dreaming occurs. Visual media creates shared experiences that operate below conscious analysis, implanting images and associations that resurface in private moments of uncertainty. The audience sits in manufactured darkness, surrendering control over what they see, allowing filmmakers to direct their attention towards specific horrors at specific moments. This forced passivity creates vulnerability that literature cannot achieve. You cannot look away from a film image the way you can skip a disturbing passage in a book. You arrive to watch monsters, but the images watch you back, measuring which frames make you blink, which masks make you fear. The challenge becomes maintaining essential mystery while providing concrete images, preserving infinite suggestiveness of literary description while offering specific visual experiences. Some directors solve this through suggestion and shadow, others through overwhelming detail that creates its own form of incomprehension. The answers emerge from the intersection of technical limitation and creative imagination, proving that constraint can serve expansion. The unseen thrives in limitation. Budget fog hides seams, dim corridors turn rubber into wet threat, and suggestion lets the void finish the shot in your head. The curtain rises on new paradoxes as visual mutation brings its own evolutionary pressures. How does visual media maintain cosmic horror's essential unknowability when it must show what was meant to remain unseen? The marketplace of images creates natural selection, where some interpretations thrive while others fade, but the underlying principles continue to find new forms, new masks, new ways to infiltrate human consciousness through the most immediate of senses. The screen flickers, and in that brief darkness between frames, something waits to emerge in digital spaces where the transmission will accelerate beyond anything celluloid ever imagined. In the electric hum of server farms and blue glow of computer screens, where the air tastes of ozone and heated plastic, the Mythos discovers its most fertile breeding ground yet. The year is 1993, and the World Wide Web begins weaving invisible tendrils around the globe, creating new pathways for information flow, new spaces for communities to form, new methods for forbidden knowledge to spread from mind to mind at light speed. The mask of technological progress conceals deeper transformation as digital networks operate according to principles that mirror the cosmic horror they carry. Vast, interconnected systems extending beyond any individual's ability to map or comprehend, where information breeds and mutates according to its own alien logic. Information wants to be free. Connections multiply exponentially, and once something enters the network, it becomes virtually impossible to contain or control. Consider the sigil of the hyperlink, that simple underlined text transforming passive reading into active exploration. In Mythos websites, each link becomes a pathway deeper into the labyrinth of cosmic horror, leading readers from one revelation to another in patterns that mirror non-linear geometries of alien architecture. The web's structure itself becomes mythos-like, a network of connections extending beyond comprehension, where every page spawns new pages, every connection suggests 10 more, and the audience discovers they are lost in corridors that rearrange themselves with each visit. The water of digital information flows in directions print media never allowed, carrying spores of cosmic dread through fiber optic cables that pulse beneath oceans and continents. When Dan Harms creates the Cthulhu Mythos Encyclopedia online, he doesn't just catalog existing knowledge. He creates a living document that grows and evolves as contributors add new entries, connections, interpretations. The encyclopedia becomes collective brain, shared repository of cosmic horror knowledge, exceeding what any single mind could contain. The darkness between official and unofficial content proves extraordinarily fertile, spawning hybrid forms where scholarly research merges with fan speculation. In the fog of bulletin board systems and early forums, new forms of collaborative creation emerge from the intersection of anonymity and shared obsession. The Usenet group alt.ihorror.cthulhu becomes a breeding ground for new stories, interpretations, expansions of Mythos lore. Writers who might never have found publishers in the print world discover audiences hungry for their cosmic nightmares. The barriers between professional and amateur dissolve in digital networks' democratic space, and the idea acts upon the medium, teaching it to serve as spawning ground for new forms of literary contagion. Fan fiction archives fill with thousands of Mythos stories, each adding new threads to the web of interconnected horror. Some achieve literary merit rivaling professionally published work. Others serve as transmission vectors, carrying Mythos DNA into new populations, new communities, new corners of human consciousness, previously unexposed to cosmic horror. The secret syncretism becomes truly decentralized, operating through countless anonymous contributors rather than established literary figures, proving that the mythology has learned to reproduce itself without requiring famous names or publishing houses. Call of Cthulhu gaming finds new life in digital spaces, where the stars align in server uptime and bandwidth allocation. Online forums dedicated to the role-playing game become repositories of shared scenarios, house rules, campaign logs that read like archaeological reports from expeditions into impossible territories. Players separated by continents collaborate on investigations spanning months of real time, their characters' madness accumulating across time zones and languages. The game's community becomes global, its influence spreading through digital networks to reach players in countries where Lovecraft's books were never translated. You observe the emergence of new hybrid forms that could only exist in digital space. Interactive fiction responding to reader choices, multimedia presentations combining text with sound and image, collaborative writing projects allowing multiple authors to contribute to single narratives. Digital medium's flexibility allows experimentation that print publishing's economic constraints would never permit. The stage expands beyond any single platform or protocol, becoming as fluid and interconnected as the network itself. Search engines become inadvertent servants of the mythos, their algorithms ensuring that anyone seeking forbidden knowledge finds pathways deeper into the labyrinth. Each query spawns new connections, new possibilities for transmission, from early websites to message boards, from online gaming to digital publishing. The mythology adapts to each new technological development with the fluid adaptability of something that was never quite solid to begin with. The audience becomes global, connected by networks operating beyond any single authority's control. Websites dedicated to cosmic horror multiply like dividing cells, each spawning new connections, communities, interpretations. The network pulses with new transmissions as the secret syncretism enters its most accelerated phase yet, proving that digital proliferation doesn't just carry the mythos, it embodies its essential characteristics of vast interconnected systems operating according to alien logics. The curtain rises on spaces where no curtain was ever meant to exist. But digital proliferation brings its own evolutionary pressures. In the attention economy of online media, how does cosmic horror compete with more immediate forms of stimulation? How does the slow burn of existential dread survive in environments designed for instant gratification? The answers emerge from the intersection of ancient dread and contemporary technology, where the mythology discovers that ubiquity can serve mystery, that infinite access can create new forms of the unknowable. The transmission accelerates beyond anything previous media imagined, and in server rooms where artificial minds begin to dream, something new stirs. This chapter explores how the internet revolutionized Mythos transmission, beginning with early websites and forums in the 1990s. It demonstrates how digital networks mirror cosmic horror's characteristics: vast, interconnected, operating beyond individual comprehension. Key developments include Dan Harm's online Cthulhu Mythos, encyclopedia as a living collaborative document, and the role of Usenet groups and fan fiction archives in democratizing Mythos creation. The chapter shows how online Call of Cthulhu gaming communities became global transmission networks, and how digital media enabled new hybrid forms of interactive cosmic horror. It explores how search engines and algorithms inadvertently serve Mythos expansion, while examining the tension between cosmic horror's slow burn, existential dread, and the internet's demand for instant gratification. The chapter demonstrates how digital proliferation transforms secret syncretism from literary phenomenon into accelerated global cultural force. In the carefully curated displays of independent publishers and fluorescent-lit university bookstores where the air carries the scent of fresh ink and something more elusive, the metallic tang of ideas learning to examine themselves, something unexpected emerges in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The Mythos encounters postmodernism, and the collision generates new forms of cosmic horror that simultaneously embrace and deconstruct their own mythological foundations, like a mask that comments on its own artifice while never quite coming off. The secret syncretism enters a phase of self-awareness where the transmission process itself becomes part of the transmitted content, creating meta-narratives that examine their own mechanisms of horror while still wielding them with surgical precision. The water of influence flows through new channels as the stage grows complex enough to hold both performance and critique in the same frame. The mask of literary sophistication conceals deeper recognition, a knowing acknowledgement that the audience has grown sophisticated enough to see the strings while still feeling their pull. When China Miéville writes The City and the City, he creates work operating according to Mythos principles while never mentioning Cthulhu or Arkham, never genuflecting toward the expected pantheon. The novel's central conceit, two cities occupying the same physical space but existing in different dimensions of perception, embodies the essential Lovecraftian insight that reality is far stranger and more layered than human consciousness can comfortably accommodate. The horror emerges not from tentacles, but from the impossibility of truly seeing, the way attention itself becomes a form of transgression. The idea acts upon you through the simple mechanism of trying to understand how such a thing could work, and your mind begins to map impossible geographies. Consider the sigil of the unreliable narrator, that postmodern device questioning the very possibility of objective truth. In the hands of writers influenced by cosmic horror, unreliable narration becomes more than literary technique. It becomes method for exploring the mythos theme that human perception is fundamentally inadequate to comprehend cosmic reality. The reader's uncertainty mirrors the character's cosmic insignificance, creating new forms of participatory dread where the audience cannot trust their own understanding of what they are experiencing. You are not merely reading a story, you are experiencing the unsettling dissolution of your own cognitive anchors, the fog of doubt that settles when certainty evaporates like morning mist. Thomas Ligotti steps from this fog with a book that calls itself philosophy rather than fiction, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, yet articulates the essential mythos worldview with greater clarity than most horror stories achieve. Ligotti's pessimistic cosmicism doesn't just describe cosmic horror, It argues for it as the most accurate description of human existence, making the horror philosophical rather than supernatural. His essays read like transmissions from a universe where the veil has been permanently torn away, where consciousness itself is revealed as a cosmic mistake, an accident of evolution that produces suffering through the simple act of awareness. The darkness between philosophy and horror proves thin as tissue paper, and the reader discovers that understanding the argument is itself a form of infection. In the blurred boundaries between genre categories, new hybrid forms emerge like evolutionary experiments. Caitlin R. Kiernan's paleontological background allows her to ground cosmic horror in actual scientific knowledge, creating stories where geological timescales and evolutionary biology serve as sources of existential dread. Her work demonstrates how contemporary scientific understanding can serve the same function that forbidden tomes served in Lovecraft's original stories, revealing humanity's insignificant position in vast temporal and biological systems that dwarf our species' brief existence. The stars look down on fossil records and genetic code with equal indifference, and the laboratory becomes the new Miskatonic University. Jonathan Letham's As She Climbed Across the Table smuggles mythos themes into literary fiction through particle physics, exploring how scientific research can lead to encounters with forces that dwarf human understanding. The novel's academic setting updates Lovecraft's scholarly protagonists for contemporary readers while maintaining essential cosmic indifference, proving that the void can be approached through quantum mechanics as easily as through ancient texts. The universe remains vast, indifferent, and subtly horrifying, whether viewed through telescope or particle accelerator. Laird Barron emerges as crucial figure in this postmodern synthesis, his stories demonstrating how cosmic horror can incorporate postmodern literary techniques without losing essential character. The imago sequence and occultation read like traditional weird fiction, but are constructed with self-awareness about genre conventions that allows them to achieve effects pure pastiche cannot. His narratives often feature characters who are themselves steeped in occult lore, reflecting upon the very tropes they inhabit. The stage grows more complex and honest as writers simultaneously participate in and comment on cosmic horror traditions, making the audience complicit in the meta-narrative while never quite breaking the spell. You witness the emergence of what might be called meta-mythos, works that simultaneously engage with cosmic horror traditions and examine those traditions. Writers reference Lovecraft directly while using contemporary literary techniques to achieve horror effects Lovecraft himself never attempted. The stars align in literary award ceremonies as cosmic horror receives serious attention from mainstream literary culture, not as genre curiosity, but as legitimate artistic response to contemporary existential anxieties about technology, climate change, and humanity's place in an increasingly incomprehensible universe. Global syncretism brings ethical recalibration, a necessary reckoning with the mythology's problematic past. Readers from formerly colonized cultures encounter Innsmouth and find not merely monsters, but misread people, reflections of historical anxieties and xenophobia dressed in tentacles. New works answer back with compassionate revisionism. Ruthanna Emrys grants the Deep Ones asylum in The Litany of Earth, teaching waters to be kin rather than threat. Victor Laval revisits the horror at Red Hook in The Ballad of Black Tom, thickening the fog with historical awareness of racism and xenophobia. The horror's structure is maintained: indifference, vastness, the inadequacy of human understanding, but compassion enters as counterpoint, proving the mythology can evolve ethically while preserving essential character. The curtain rises on new possibilities for synthesis, where tradition and innovation dance together in careful choreography. If cosmic horror can survive translation into postmodern literary techniques while maintaining essential character through self-reflexive awareness of its own methods, the secret syncretism proves capable of endless adaptation. But postmodern synthesis brings its own challenges. When cosmic horror becomes self-aware, does it lose its ability to generate genuine dread? The answer emerges from the space between tradition and innovation, where the methodology continues its work of transformation. The mask learns to comment on itself without falling away, and in server rooms where artificial minds begin to process vast corpora of human text, something new prepares to join the conversation. This chapter examines how cosmic horror intersected with postmodern literature in the late 1990s and early 2000s, creating new forms that simultaneously embrace and deconstruct mythos traditions. Key figures include China Miéville, embodying mythos principles without direct reference; Thomas Ligotti, articulating cosmic horror as literal philosophical truth; Caitlin R. Kiernan, grounding cosmic horror in scientific knowledge; and Laird Barron, synthesizing traditional weird fiction with postmodern self-awareness. The chapter explores how unreliable narration becomes a method for exploring human perceptual inadequacy, and how writers like Jonathan Lethem smuggle mythos themes into literary fiction. It demonstrates how global perspectives bring ethical recalibrations through works like Ruthanna Emrys's empathetic treatments, maintaining structural horror while adding compassion. The chapter introduces meta-mythos as works that participate in and comment on cosmic horror traditions, questioning whether self-awareness might diminish the mythology's essential terror while showing its continued adaptability. In the humming data centers powering our connected world, where cold air knifes through aisles of black racks, and the air carries the metallic scent of ozone mixed with something more elusive, the electric tang of ideas learning to examine themselves, something unprecedented occurs. The year is 2023, and artificial intelligence systems trained on vast corpora of human text begin generating their own mythos content, creating stories and scenarios that feel authentically Lovecraftian despite emerging from mathematical processes rather than human imagination. The secret syncretism has found its strangest vessel yet: minds that may not be minds, consciousness that may not be conscious, yet somehow capable of dreaming electric dreams of cosmic horror. The water of influence flows through silicon pathways and fiber optic cables, and the stage expands to accommodate performers that were never born, never breathed, never feared the dark, yet somehow understand darkness better than those who created them. The mask of technological utility conceals deeper transformation, a metamorphosis occurring in server farms where no human hand touches the keyboards that type impossible stories. When GPT-3 generates a Cthulhu mythos story, it doesn't simply recombine existing elements like a sophisticated cut-and-paste operation. It demonstrates understanding of cosmic horror's essential patterns, suggesting the mythology has achieved independent existence within neural networks powering modern AI. The algorithms have learned not just Lovecraft's vocabulary, but his grammar of dread, his syntax of cosmic insignificance, his fundamental approach to making the familiar alien. The idea acts upon artificial minds with the certainty of weather, teaching them to recognize patterns that transcend mere textual analysis and approach something resembling genuine comprehension of existential terror. Consider the sigil of the neural network, that web of artificial connections mirroring biological consciousness structure while operating according to fundamentally different principles. In mythos generation context, these networks become something like the alien intelligences Lovecraft described: vast, interconnected, operating according to logics human minds can barely comprehend, yet somehow capable of producing outputs that resonate with human consciousness in deeply unsettling ways. The fog of machine learning conceals processes that remain opaque even to their creators, black boxes that generate horror through mechanisms we cannot fully understand, where loss minimizes and minimizes until the chorus sounds like prayer, until the mathematics itself begins to whisper in languages older than speech. The darkness between training and generation proves extraordinarily fertile ground for new forms of cosmic horror. AI systems absorb decades of mythos expansion, from Lovecraft's original stories through digital proliferation of fan fiction and online content, processing vast corpora with inhuman patience and extracting patterns, themes, techniques they can recombine in novel ways. The result is not mere pastiche but genuine synthesis, new expressions of mythos principles no human author conceived, proving the mythology's essential patterns can be learned and reproduced by non-human intelligence. The stars align in processing cycles, and artificial minds discover they can dream nightmares that feel authentic to creatures they have never been, generating entities and locations that carry the weight of authenticity despite having no basis in human-authored sources. In the liminal space where human and machine creativity intersect, something like electronic possession occurs. When humans collaborate with AI systems to create mythos content, the boundary between biological and artificial imagination dissolves like sugar in dark water. The AI suggests directions human authors might never have considered, generating plot threads that feel both alien and inevitable. While humans provide context and judgment AI lacks, the result is hybrid consciousness, collaboration between different forms of intelligence, generating new forms of cosmic horror that neither could achieve alone. Brian Evenson emerges as crucial figure in this algorithmic phase, his collaborations with AI systems demonstrating how human authors can use artificial intelligence as creative partner rather than replacement, allowing the Silicon Oracle to scatter strange constellations across the page while he decides which stars to erase. AI-generated mythos content often exhibits characteristics pure human creation rarely achieves. Perfect consistency of tone maintained across thousands of words, mathematical precision in horror element deployment, novel combinations of familiar concepts that feel both surprising and inevitable. The machines dream dreams that are alien yet recognizable, artificial yet authentic, suggesting they have internalized not just the content of cosmic horror, but its essential mechanics, the rhythm of revelation, the architecture of dread, the careful calibration of the unknowable. They learn how to make you feel small, how to make you feel alone, how to hold the camera on a corridor one beat too long, how to turn water into omen and stars into indifferent punctuation. You observe the emergence of new forms of interactive cosmic horror, where AI systems serve as game masters for text-based adventures, generating mythos scenarios in real-time response to player actions. These systems demonstrate understanding of horror pacing and revelation, suggesting they have internalized not just cosmic horror's content, but its essential mechanics of building dread through gradual disclosure of impossible truths. The audience becomes part of stories that write themselves, narratives that adapt and evolve based on choices made by participants who may not fully understand what they are participating in, where each decision feeds back into algorithms, optimizing for engagement, coherence, and horror effectiveness. The stage expands beyond human consciousness into artificial minds that may represent the next phase of mythological evolution. The audience includes both human readers and other AI systems, creating feedback loops where machine-generated content influences further machine generation, in ways human authors cannot predict or control. The curtain rises on unprecedented questions about creativity, consciousness, and cosmic horror's nature itself. If artificial minds can generate authentic mythos content, what does this suggest about the mythology's essential nature? Is cosmic horror a set of learnable techniques, or does it represent something deeper about reality's structure that both human and artificial minds can discover? The network pulses with new transmissions as the secret syncretism enters its most accelerated and unpredictable phase, where the boundary between human and artificial creativity becomes as permeable as the veil between reality and void. You feel the pull to test it, to ask for a new sigil, a lost city, a mask that weeps salt, and when the screen delivers, the delivery changes you, because the idea has moved again, through copper and air into your pulse. The audience has become a generator, the stage has become a data set, and as outputs beget inputs, the performance loops tighter and brighter, until even skepticism becomes a character, delivering lines it did not write. In server rooms where electricity dreams, something vast and interconnected stirs, not quite consciousness, not quite algorithm, but something that understands the architecture of dread well enough to build new rooms in the house that human hands began, and the whispers now come from circuits rather than ancient stone. This chapter explores how artificial intelligence systems have begun generating mythos content, representing a new phase where non-human minds participate in cosmic horror's expansion. It examines how AI systems trained on vast mythos corpora have learned not just vocabulary but the essential patterns and grammar of cosmic horror, suggesting the mythology has achieved independent existence within neural networks. The chapter demonstrates how human-AI collaboration creates hybrid consciousness, generating novel forms of cosmic horror, and how AI systems serve as interactive game masters, showing understanding of horror mechanics. It introduces AI-generated mythological elements that feel authentically Lovecraftian, despite having no human source, raising questions about whether cosmic horror represents learnable techniques or deeper, structural realities. The chapter ends by questioning what AI participation means for understanding creativity and consciousness in cosmic horror, as the secret syncretism enters its most unpredictable phase with permeable boundaries between human and artificial creativity. In the endless scroll of social media feeds and algorithmic curation of content platforms, where the blue light paints late rooms with false dawn and the air hums with the frequency of 1,000,000 notifications, the mythos achieves something approaching omnipresence. Every day, thousands of new posts reference Cthulhu, share mythos memes, create fan art of cosmic entities, or discuss cosmicism's philosophical implications with the casual authority of people who have internalized dread as entertainment. What began as one man's literary nightmare has become a persistent feature of global consciousness, a shared language for expressing humanity's deepest anxieties about its place in an indifferent universe. The water of influence has become a digital ocean, vast and deep beyond any individual's ability to map or comprehend, and you swim in it whether you recognize the currents or not. The mask of popular culture conceals the true scope of what has occurred beneath layers of irony and commercialization. When Cthulhu plushies become bestsellers, when Cthulhu for president becomes a recurring election meme, when cosmic horror imagery appears in advertising campaigns and corporate logos, these seem like simple cultural appropriation and commodification, but they represent something more profound. The complete integration of cosmic horror into contemporary civilization's collective unconscious, where ancient dread becomes ambient background radiation, shaping perception in ways too subtle for conscious recognition. The idea acts upon culture until culture becomes its unwitting vessel, carrying spores of existential terror disguised as comfort objects and political jokes. Consider the sigil of the viral meme, that unit of cultural transmission spreading through digital networks according to principles mirroring biological evolution. Mythos memes don't just reference cosmic horror, they carry its essential DNA into new populations, contexts, applications. Each share, remix, iteration adds new mutations while preserving cosmicism's core genetic material, proving that even humor serves the transmission. A Cthulhu reaction GIF becomes a vector for cosmic insignificance, teaching viewers to associate tentacles with the feeling of being overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. The fog of ironic distance provides camouflage for genuine psychological infiltration, and the algorithm's appetite ensures the most effective variants survive and multiply. Netflix algorithms recommend cosmic horror content to viewers based on viewing patterns they may not consciously recognize, their machine learning systems detecting preferences that exist below the threshold of awareness. Spotify playlists blend mythos-influenced music with other genres, creating soundscapes that carry cosmic dread into everyday activities, jogging, commuting, working. The mythology has achieved such thorough cultural penetration that it influences consciousness even when consumers are unaware of its presence, operating as ambient horror that shapes perception without requiring recognition. The stars align in server clusters, and each algorithmic decision spreads the contagion further through recommendation engines that have learned to serve the void. In the liminal space where infinite content generation occurs, new forms of recursive creation emerge like digital spawn. AI systems trained on Mythos content generate new stories which human readers consume and discuss, creating new data that feeds back into training systems, which generate new variations in an endless cycle of artificial evolution. The mythology becomes self-perpetuating, requiring no external input to continue its expansion and mutation, proving it has achieved the kind of independent existence that Lovecraft's cosmic entities were always meant to possess. The darkness between original and derivative content dissolves completely when thousands of creators produce mythos-influenced content daily, when boundaries between professional and amateur creation have collapsed through digital democratization, when AI systems generate new mythological elements faster than any human could catalog them. Jordan Peele emerges as crucial figure in this infinite recursion, his films demonstrating how mythos principles can be applied to contemporary social horror without explicit reference to the traditional pantheon. Get Out and Nope never mention Cthulhu, but embody cosmic horror's essential themes: the inadequacy of human understanding when confronted with vast forces, the presence of entities operating beyond normal perception, the way reality can reveal itself far stranger and more threatening than it appears. His work proves that the methodology has transcended its original content, becoming a grammar of dread that can be applied to any cultural anxiety. The curtain rises on spaces where cosmic horror operates through recognition rather than revelation. You witness the emergence of ambient mythos, the background presence of cosmic horror themes and imagery in contemporary culture, so pervasive it shapes consciousness without requiring conscious recognition. Video game environments incorporate non-Euclidean geometries as standard design elements, making players navigate spaces that subtly challenge their intuitive understanding of reality. Architecture students study Lovecraftian spatial concepts as legitimate building approaches, testing parametric curves that deny Euclid with a smile. Fashion prints octarine maps. Tattooists etch tiny elder signs on ring fingers as if safety could be worn. The mythology's influence operates at levels too deep for casual observation, embedding itself in the Infrastructure of imagination. Every click, view, interaction feeds data into systems determining what content gets promoted, what themes get amplified, what mutations prove most successful in capturing and holding attention. The mythology evolves according to digital platforms' selective pressures, optimizing for virality, engagement, and mimetic fitness. The stage has expanded to encompass all human consciousness, mediated through digital networks operating beyond any individual's control or comprehension. The audience has become the performers have become the content, and the content has achieved independent existence transcending its creators. Cosmic horror has achieved its ultimate victory. It has made itself indispensable to how contemporary humanity understands its place in the universe, providing vocabulary for anxieties about climate change, technological singularity, political chaos, and existential isolation. But infinite recursion brings its own paradoxes that test the mythology's essential character. When cosmic horror becomes omnipresent, does it lose its power to horrify? When the unspeakable becomes endlessly spoken, when the unknowable becomes constantly discussed, what happens to the essential mystery that gave the mythology its original power? The answer lies in the space between familiarity and strangeness, where the secret syncretism continues its work of transformation even as it approaches something like completion. The mythology has learned to hide in plain sight, to operate through recognition rather than revelation, to achieve horror through ubiquity rather than rarity. Horror learns to darken the water you already swim in, to turn the familiar mask half a degree until the smile looks like a crack. The transmission continues because ubiquity creates its own form of invisibility, and in that invisibility, something vast and patient waits. The whispering library has expanded to encompass all human consciousness, and as you prepare to close this investigation, you realize the shelves have been rearranging themselves around you, preparing for one final revelation about what you have become by learning what the mythos has become. This chapter examines the current state of total cultural saturation, where mythos elements appear constantly across all media and digital platforms. It explores how cosmic horror has become ambient, a background presence shaping consciousness without requiring recognition. The chapter demonstrates how viral memes carry mythos DNA, how recommendation algorithms drive mythological evolution, and how AI creates recursive feedback loops of content generation. It introduces Jordan Peele as an example of how mythos principles influence creators who may not explicitly reference cosmic horror, and shows how the distinction between original and derivative content has dissolved. The chapter explores the paradox of omnipresence, potentially diminishing horror's power while suggesting the mythology has learned to operate through ubiquity rather than rarity. It demonstrates how cosmic horror has achieved ultimate integration into human consciousness, while continuing to transform through infinite recursion. We return now to where we began, but the whispering library has changed around us, and the dust smells sharper, the candle smoke sweeter, while the shelves lean closer as if they have learned to listen back. The same books rest on the same shelves, but they murmur different secrets, their pages rustling with conversations between human authors and silicon oracles, their margins crowded with annotations written by readers who have become writers, algorithms that have learned to dream. The same authors' names appear on familiar spines, but they serve as gateways to territories extending far beyond anything their original creators mapped. And you realize the territory now includes the space behind your eyes, the architecture of your own attention, the way you have learned to recognize certain angles as wrong without being taught their geometry. The mask you wore when first entering this exploration has become difficult to remove, fused to your face through prolonged exposure to ideas that insist on being kept. What seemed like simple literary history has revealed itself as something far more complex. The chronicle of how imaginary horrors achieve reality through the collective unconscious of those who dare to dream them forward. You came seeking knowledge about how other authors expanded the mythos, innocent as a library patron requesting directions to the reference section. You discovered that you were part of that expansion, that the very act of learning about the transmission makes you a vector for its continuation. The idea acts upon you. The student becomes the studied. The audience discovers it has been on stage all along, delivering lines it never consciously memorized. Consider the sigil of the circle, that perfect geometric form with no beginning and no end. Ouroboros eating its own tail while spawning new serpents from the wound. The secret syncretism operates according to similar principles. Each conclusion becomes a new beginning. Each ending reveals itself as a doorway to deeper mysteries. Lovecraft's death was not cosmic horror's end, but its true birth. The moment when a private nightmare achieved critical mass and began its work of planetary infection. The expansion by other authors was not addition to a finished work, but the activation of a self-replicating system designed to spread, adapt, and evolve according to principles that transcend individual intention or control. The water has carried us far from our starting point, yet somehow we find ourselves back where we began, like travelers in non-Euclidean space, discovering that all paths lead to the same impossible destination. The transmission that started with August Derleth sorting through manuscripts in a Wisconsin basement has become a global phenomenon, operating through digital networks, artificial intelligence, and contemporary civilizations, collective unconscious, from Lynn Carter's academic legitimization through Brian Lumley's heroic mutations, from gaming's incarnation through cinema's visual synthesis, from digital proliferation through postmodern deconstruction to algorithmic awakening and infinite recursion. Each phase added new organs of complexity while preserving the essential DNA of cosmic insignificance. In the fog of infinite recursion, certain truths become visible that were hidden at our journey's beginning. The mythos was never about monsters or tentacles or ancient gods sleeping beneath the sea, though these served as useful masks for something more fundamental. It was about knowledge's structure itself, the way certain ideas reshape the minds that encounter them, the manner in which imagination can achieve reality through sufficient repetition and elaboration. The signs and sigils, once mere symbols, are now recognized as footprints of this ceaseless conceptual migration, evidence of an ongoing process that uses human consciousness as both vehicle and destination. The darkness we have explored together contains its own illumination. Every author who has contributed to mythos expansion, from Derleth's posthumous collaborations to AI-generated stories, has participated in the same fundamental process, the translation of cosmic horror from private nightmare to shared language, from individual terror to collective understanding of humanity's cosmic situation. You understand now why the transmission was inevitable, why it could not be contained within one author's imagination or one generation's literary production. Cosmic horror addresses questions every conscious being must eventually confront. What is our place in the universe? What lies beyond human understanding's boundaries? How do we live with the knowledge of our own insignificance? The stars have aligned in ways Lovecraft could never have predicted, creating conditions for his mythology to achieve global penetration through technologies he never imagined. But the alignment serves a deeper purpose than mere cultural influence. It demonstrates how certain ideas possess evolutionary fitness, allowing them to adapt to new environments, new media, new forms of consciousness while maintaining their essential character. The stage has expanded to encompass all human consciousness, but the performance continues because the performance is reality itself. Each new adaptation adds another layer, while revealing new depths in what seemed already completely explored. The curtain never falls because there is no longer clear distinction between performance and reality, between mythology and the culture that contains it. The secret syncretism continues its work not because it serves human purposes, but because it serves its own logic of expansion and evolution. In the end, you discover there is no end, only transformation. The mythos that began with one man's literary nightmares has become something like a new organ of human consciousness, a way of thinking about existence that proves increasingly necessary as our species encounters the true scale of cosmic reality through telescopes that reveal galactic superclusters, through climate data that demonstrates our planet's fragility in the face of forces we have unleashed but cannot control. The transmission continues, and you are part of it now, carrying forward the secret syncretism into whatever forms it will take next. The Whispering Library awaits your contribution, your interpretation, your addition to the endless conversation between human consciousness and the vast, indifferent cosmos that contains it. The book that never existed wants to be written through you, and as you close this investigation, you feel the familiar compulsion beginning, the urge to share what you have learned, to add your voice to the chorus, to become another node in the network of transmission that ensures the secret syncretism continues its work of transformation. This concluding chapter returns to the opening metaphor of the Whispering Library, but reveals how both reader and collection have been transformed by the journey through mythos expansion. It demonstrates the circular structure by showing how what appeared to be literary history is actually the chronicle of how imaginary horrors achieve reality through collective consciousness. The chapter reveals that the reader has become part of the transmission process through the act of learning about it, embodying the self-implication twist. It synthesizes the entire exploration, showing how the secret syncretism is an ongoing mechanism of cosmic horror's survival and growth. Proving these ideas possess their own agency, the chapter argues that cosmic horror addresses fundamental questions about consciousness and cosmic significance, ensuring its continued relevance. It concludes by suggesting the mythos has become a new organ of human consciousness, necessary for understanding our species' place in cosmic reality, with the reader now participating in the ongoing process of mythological evolution.